Welcome. I'm Carolyn Herbin. I'm an occupational therapist.
And I'm Harla Rudolph, speech language pathologist. Welcome to Two Therapists Sitting in a Tree, TALKING. We are very excited today to have author and occupational therapist Lindsey Biel.
Yes, very exciting to have another OT on the podcast today. I was telling Lindsey before, I feel like I'm meeting a celebrity because I read
We're
her
very
book and
excited.
recommended to everybody.
Yeah.
So Lindsey is an occupational therapist. She's based in New York City, and she specializes in treatment of children, teens, young adults facing sensory processing issues, autism, and other various challenges. She's the co-author of the book Raising a Sensory Smart Child, which is the definitive handbook for helping your child with sensory processing issues. She co-authored the book with a parent, I'm correct, right, of
Yeah.
one of the children that you saw, which I think is also amazing.
Incredible to get that point of view.
Yes. And she has also written the sensory processing challenges, and she has a checklist on her website that sensorysmarts.com that gives some information to help determine a child's sensory portrait. So yes.
Welcome, Lindsey.
Hi, it's such a pleasure to join you. I've
How are
known Carla for a very long time, and now we're old friends. So it's great to be here with you.
Yes, I was thinking about it on the way over here. It had to have been, we met, I want to say 16, 17 years ago at this point.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. At the Shield Institute, I think.
Prior
Maybe.
to that, we
Prior to
did a
that. Prior to that.
presentation together. I was speaking on feeding. You were speaking on sensory processing
Right.
through early intervention.
Through
The
Yeah,
E3I. Yeah, well,
that's right.
welcome.
That's right. Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to speak with you. And it's so funny. To be thought of as a celebrity because I'm just a working OT who, I was an author before I was a writer before I became an OT. So when I became an OT, it was very natural to want to write and share my, increasing body of knowledge through writing. And what I was finding was that parents were really pretty baffled by the sensory processing thing. And the best, I sort of think through writing and do best pulling my thoughts together through the written word. So I'm like, well, all right, let's write a book. And the woman that I was seeing, Nancy Pesky, also is a writer. So we were able to fairly easily co-author a book. She already had an agent, which helped. So we were able to move that through pretty quickly. And, Raising a Sensory Smart Child was born. It's now in its third edition. And it's been translated into Spanish and Chinese, Turkish, Croatian, Serbian, and a couple of other languages. So,
What year did you write that, Lindsey?
hmm?
What year was that you wrote it?
It first came out in 2005.
Okay.
Did a major rewrite in 2009, added some chapters, really updated it with a lot of the current science, did another edition update in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of differences did you see since when you first began and wrote the book? I would think that there's been a lot of changes in the field.
There have been a lot of changes. I mean, one of the great things was that when I first started out in this field, people didn't know what it was.
Mhm.
I was working in the schools and I'm like, I didn't really know what it was that much. I had a lecture on
Mhm.
sensory processing in
Mm.
graduate school at New York University. So I was like, what is this weird thing that's going on with kids? Like, regardless of their diagnosis, regardless of if they had, if they were labeled autistic or ADHD or learning disorder or nothing or other health impaired, which is what you see a lot in the schools. But there was this cross current that, you know, that so many kids had, and I really wanted to tune into that. And since then, and I do, pat myself on the back quite a bit, the knowledge has gotten out to the schools. The
Yeah.
schools are much more aware of what these differences are, and pediatricians are.
Mhm.
I
And
wrote a second book for the mental health practitioner in 2014 called Sensory Processing Challenges. And, I wanted the child psychologist to understand what this is. It's just a different way of perceiving and experiencing our very rich sensory world. So now it's at the point where I'm getting referrals from pediatricians and psychologists and speech therapists and teachers. Like, I think this child has sensory issues. It's wonderful. It's
yeah.
so much out there. That's really, to me, been the biggest change.
Mhm. And I agree. I think from even, I mean, I've been in practice for almost 25 years, and just seeing from the beginning, again, you didn't really hear about it in the schools when I was there at all in the beginning. You were an OT, you worked on handwriting, and that was it.
Mhm.
And now, like you said, I feel like pediatricians were getting referrals constantly, from schools, pediatricians, speech therapists, physical therapists, like you said, psychologists, and it's great to see. And like you said, though, it is baffling, and parents can start, they'll hear the doctor will say, oh, I think your child has sensory issues, and they'll start Googling what's sensory processing disorder. And there's so much information, and it's so overwhelming. But I think your book does a really good job. I think you do a great job of breaking it down for the parent and really explaining it in a way that makes sense. Um,
Thank you.
so if you can just kind of describe sensory processing
Sure.
disorder to us, so the parents have a
Absolutely.
better understanding.
Yeah, I mean, parents are completely baffled by it. I was baffled by it when I started almost 25 years ago. And like, what is this thing? And parents first think like, oh, there's sensory issues, and they automatically think, oh, my child is autistic. Uh,
Mhm.
and that may be true. Um, but not everyone, and I will explain it in simple terms in a moment. Um, you know, a lot of kids have sensory processing challenges, right? But they're not all autistic. But virtually everyone who's on the autism spectrum does have sensory challenges. So they're not synonymous, they're quite different, but it's very common with autistic kids and adults. So basically all sensory processing is this: what happens when a child is young, right? When a baby is out there touching things and smelling things and seeing things and hearing things. Sensory processing is the neurological process of pulling in that information and transforming it into meaningful messages, so they know how to respond accordingly to what they're experiencing from the outside world and from inside their bodies. It's something that most of us do automatically. You're not thinking about, the visuals and are you getting overwhelmed because my hand is moving? Are you distracted by that? It's just something that most people do automatically. However, some people take in and use that information in a different way. Now, I'm not going to say it's atypical or it's bad or it's, faulty or deficient. It's in a different way. So they're getting kind of different information. Now, there's the neurodiverse population, there's a lot of room for different ways of perceiving the world. What often happens is that kids will have, or people, I work with kids primarily, so I'm going to keep talking about kids. They may have what seem like out of proportion reactions to everyday experiences, and that can be baffling for a parent. So let's say noise sensitivity. Most of us start to hear at 0 to 15 decibels of sound. A hypersensitive, auditory hypersensitive person will start to hear at 0 decibels, negative 15 decibels of sound. Temple Grandin, who wrote the foreword for the book, can hear at negative 15 decibels of sound. So there's a lot of sound coming in, right? And their auditory system is getting flooded. And they may be particularly sensitive to certain frequencies of sound. So a certain person's voice, often a high-pitched voice, will be experienced by that person like a dentist drill hitting a nerve.
And
So
as speech therapists, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just listening to you and I'm thinking as speech therapists, that's always how we work with kids, with this high pitched, loud voice. And we see our kids just cover their ears. It's just too much for them.
right, they're covering their ears in speech in the classroom when they're out in the shopping mall. It's too much. They're just pulling in too much sound. So they're pulling it in, and when you're pulling that in so much, how are you supposed to like filter out what's important? It's
We're
not
able to filter out if the air conditioning's on or if the refrigerator's running. We don't
right.
hear it anymore,
Right.
right?
So kids are overloading all over the place. And it's not just sound. You know, we think about kids who are hypersensitive. It's like the volume control is up on any sensory system. So, you know, there are those kids who get a little, you know, another child in pre-K brushes against them and they're like, you hit me. And it's like, you're the parent, you're the teacher, you saw the kids and like, he didn't hit you know, what are you making such a big deal about? But because the volume is turned way up for that kid, it's like, it is felt in a bigger way. So you do have these hypersensitive kids. You know, they tend to be very selective eaters, right? Because those textures are hard to manage. There's a lot of reasons why kids will be selective eaters. They tend to be kind of protective. They don't, you know, it's very hard if you feel like the world is attacking you all the time. It's very hard. Your kids will kind of turn a little bit inward, be maybe a little bit controlling and rigid because they feel so much at the mercy of what's going on out there. It's like, I'm going to line up my toys just so, because I can control that. And that's a beautiful thing. So we have kids who are kind of doing that. And then you have kids who are undersensitive and they're seeking out sensory input for it to register on their sensory systems. So you may have a child who just like, parents sometimes describe them as just too much. You know, they just want to be on the swing for hours and they're jumping into the sandbox and climbing on the furniture, and it's just too much. It's because their volume control is set too low. So, but what we're most often see as OTs and speech therapists, speech language pathologists, teachers, is kids who are overloading in our schools. And and I want to give you an image that I think is really helpful. Let's say you go to a picnic with a paper plate. And the paper plate is your child's nervous system, their brain and their body. So you go to the picnic with a paper plate and you put on a hot dog and maybe a taco and you're fine. And then some potato chips and you're fine. And then you go for a little coleslaw and you're okay. The plate's getting heavy, but everything's fine. But then you can't resist the potato salad and you put that on too, and the whole plate falls apart. Right? This is what's happening with their kids. There's too much on their paper plate. So what do? As grown-ups, we need to figure out how much can go on that paper plate before it's going to fall apart. And as therapists and as teachers and as parents too, we need to build a stronger paper plate because we know that the world it's inevitable things are going to happen, changes are going to happen, sensory experiences are going to build up, but we need to manage that. And that's really what it's all about to me.
Agree. We see that all the time.
Yes.
What we find though, not everyone's recognizing that. And I
Mhm.
think there's been definitely a huge shift in awareness. Certainly the insurance companies don't want to see that. They don't want to pay for that. Or sometimes in the school, we find that if the child has sensory issues, they may not getting OT to support them.
Right.
So we're trying to figure out ways to make it medically appropriate in order for the child to qualify, or in the school to write reports to show that they need support. And I'm sure you're seeing that as well.
Right. So when a child is experiencing these things, we can't medically, you're not going to code for sensory processing challenges. But what you can code for, parents, we have to come up with codes for everything we do.
Yeah.
It's very annoying, but it's part of what we do.
Reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what is happening functionally? That's what it's all about. I don't care if someone is hypersensitive to sound, but if it's interfering with their ability to, and I'm giving you the words, to access the educational curriculum, then you've got it.
Right.
Right? So if a child is, overwhelmed by a lot of movement, by a lot of, people around, can they navigate the stairs safely?
Mhm.
Can they sit at a desk, at a table, and get their work done? These are the things that we begin to look at. Can they manipulate objects if their hands are super sensitive, can they manipulate objects in a way that is age appropriate, grade appropriate? I hate that word appropriate, but there it is. So we have to look at function.
Mhm.
And in schools, I can't do sensory integration work in the schools where I see kids, but I can do preparatory work in order to meet those school-based goals. Anyone working in a school has their educational goals.
Right.
Right. So it tends to be for OTs, it tends to be handwriting, scissoring, gym skills. If they're not getting PT, sometimes we start to split kids up. From the waist up is OT, from the waist down is PT. As an OT, I do it all. I'm not an expert the way a PT would be in ambulation, things like that. So we really have to collaborate with the schools. And I can do that with things, I can't, it depends on the school, but there are things that I can implement with a school that is open, that can assist a child in the classroom. I love to create sensory boxes for when they need breaks. Kids who have sensory challenges, they're taking the breaks, just not in a great way already. So it becomes relatively easy to convince a school, like, here's this box. When you see, Debbie is having a problem, or Debbie loses it at 11 o'clock every day. Like at 10:45, Debbie's going to take a break with her sensory box. And what's in her sensory box? Often a weighted like a little weighted lap pad that she can put around her shoulders, and maybe some sound reducing earmuffs. In the UK, they're called ear defenders, which I
Really?
love.
Oh, I like
Yeah,
that.
ear defenders. Isn't that great? Like, it's just a common term.
Like the purpose
Yeah,
of it,
right?
right?
Yeah, that's what they are. Some hand squeezers for some kids, a little picture book for some kids, a little essential oil, that kind of thing. Like, 5-10 minutes with their sensory box, a lot of our kids can reorganize and stay regulated and rejoin the group. Also getting teachers are, their big thing is like, I have so much I need to get done in the course of a school day. I can't do OT things, OT things. I'm like, if the whole class benefits from a short break, movement break, the entire class, the same way all of us benefit from curb cuts that were implemented through the Americans with Disability Act. Curb cuts in our curbs makes it super easy for, someone to push a baby carriage up onto the sidewalk and, rolling luggage, all of that stuff. These accommodations for our kids with sensory needs benefit everybody. They reset the body and the brain. So giving schools, some, a 10-minute workout of
Lindsay,
movement activities. Yeah.
I'd like, with those stipulations in place, I would assume a lot of the schools require a 504. They don't just do that. So I just want to be clear about what parents might need to do, because that's what parents are looking to say, what can I do?
Right, either an IEP or a 504
So if they're
would
not,
be where these modifications would be.
Yeah.
okay.
I'm lucky because I do work with a lot of schools that are like, it's a good idea. Okay, we'll do it.
Yeah, not always.
It doesn't always work that way.
Right.
And
Yeah.
any accommodation, even if it's something as simple as, move and sit, cushion.
Exactly.
Most schools, you need to get that onto a 504 at least if the child does not have an IEP. I don't know if you want to go ahead and define what
Yeah,
those
so an
are.
IEP is an individualized education plan, and that's given to kids. They have to qualify for that through a process where they do an evaluation on a child, and then they classify them as whatever, I guess, the results
Communication impaired
show.
or right.
Specific learning disability, autistic, and they have goals in that IEP and modifications that help a child get to where they need to be. So a 504 can be used if a child doesn't qualify for that IEP, but they have, so it's through the American Disabilities Act. And so if a child has a diagnosis of, say, autism, but it's not affecting their academics, then they can use a 504 plan, which then puts modifications and other things in place to help a child.
And the reason why we often say that it's important to get, because let's just say you're in a classroom one year and the classroom teacher says, sure, not a problem,
Right.
we'll put this into play. But when the child goes to the next grade or the next teacher,
Right.
it's not in writing,
all
it's not
over.
it's going to happen.
Well,
So
and I
just,
think too, like you said, I think it almost is a reminder too for the teachers when it's in
Yep.
writing. And I really like the plate analogy. And so I think even telling teachers, explaining to them, this child's plate, is getting so full. When you think about all the things that happen in a school, right? All the noise from the other students, the lunchroom, the gym time,
movement.
moving around in gym, becoming overstimulated. The lights, a lot of the times are those fluorescent lights, which can be overstimulating. And so kind of explaining to teachers, what can we, until this child's plate gets stronger, what can we take off the plate in order for them to better function?
Yeah.
So again, that might be the headphones, to cancel out some of that noise. So, okay, we're gonna take some of that noise off this plate to make it a little lighter for them.
Lindsay, I'm going to steal that analogy from you, if
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll copy
Okay.
it.
Credit me. Credit me. It's in the books. Yeah. But I think it's a useful one because it's something that we can all relate to.
You can visualize it, right? You
it
can visualize
takes-
the plate breaking with one thing, only one scoop, and there it goes,
Right. Right. And we've all experienced it in our own lives. It's just like, oh, that's it. I've had it.
That's the breaking point.
Yeah. So our kids, their paper plates are flimsier than ours are.
Right. And I
So,
think too, explaining, I try to explain that to parents about our experiences too. You've had days, right, where everyone's yelling in your house, the kids are crying, something spills, all these things add up, right? And you finally just lose it and you're like,
No,
Right.
I'm
yell
laughing
or
because the analogy I use is, I don't know if you grew up in the 80s, you know that game, Don't Tip the Waiter, where you had a
Yeah.
tray, one more piece of food, and the waiter goes over. And that's my analogy.
Yeah.
Don't tip
Oh,
the waiter.
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that.
But
I
it
love
happens
that.
to us as adults too. So I think
Absolutely.
when you're giving them that visual or that, putting it in their experience too,
Right,
it's easier for a teacher to understand or a parent to understand.
right.
Oh yeah, that's what it feels like,
Yeah.
because I think sometimes we forget that, you know, kids are feeling the same things we are.
Mhm.
So.
They absolutely, and they can't tell us.
Right. I mean, how many times a day do we get up and go take a sip of water
Mhm.
or just go to the bathroom to get up and move while we're sitting at, doing work at a computer? So we
Mhm.
do it because our bodies know when we need it. But these kids, their bodies aren't there yet. They're not able to
Exactly.
do it on their own. They need someone to.
Right, right.
Um,
Another thing, if I may, that I love to talk to parents about is kind of I call it like a 4-step process. I'll simplify it here. For problem solving when you're having struggles at home with a certain task. And I'm going to give an example that I think a lot of parents will relate to, which is toothbrushing. Why is this so hard for so many kids? It is so hard for so many kids. And when I do an in-person workshop, I love to start it by picking up a toothbrush and walking up to someone who I think can take it and ask them if I can brush their teeth. And people like freak out, like, are
Right.
you
I'm not sure.
crazy?
Yeah.
Know? Or another one I like to do when we talk about sharing is I ask someone if I can wear their beautiful wedding ring for a little while. I'll give it back to them. And that's just
Yeah.
amusing
No, no,
myself.
those
No,
are
but it's true. I mean,
perfect
imagine if
analogies.
somebody
These are
came up
good.
to, I'm just
These are
thinking
good.
now, if I went up to Harlan and took a brush and just started brushing her hair
But
for
that-
Right, like, no. But with
So,
with the
yeah.
toothbrushing, with any kind of like activity of daily living, OTs call it, but like the things your child needs to do to, get through the day, brushing their teeth, washing their hair. You're like, well, what's, these basic things, using deodorant for older kids. Um, there's a couple of things I want you to start thinking about. Really break it down into the component parts. What is it? Let's take toothbrushing. What is it about the room where my child is brushing their teeth? So you start with the environment. Your child is refusing to brush their teeth or just does it and then runs. Is it the fluorescent light? You brought that up earlier. A lot of our kids, especially our kids who are autistic, are really sensitive to those fluorescent lights. They can see it flicker on and off. They can hear it. It really disturbs them. So, what's going on from a sensory aspect? Is it the lighting? Is it that you've asked your child to step up onto a stool so that they're standing, on the top of a cliff, right? And they're looking at themselves in the mirror at the same time. Like, it can be really overwhelming for some of our kids. Is it the toothbrush? Is it the flavor of the toothpaste? Our kids are super, picky eaters usually, and the flavor of the toothpaste may be like disgusting to them, really freak them out. So, and then not to mention the motor aspects of, doing all that stuff to get in the mouth. And parents usually grab the toothbrush and do it for them. And it's,
Yeah.
oh,
And then for a
so
kid, like you said, on high alert and not knowing what to expect.
right. So there's so many aspects here. So we start with the environment, we start with the activity. Start to think about the variables you can change. Think about if your child feels safe, right? That's always the first thing. Anytime your child is refusing anything. Think about the variables and start to think about what you can change. Number one, there's no law that you have to brush your teeth in the bathroom.
Mhm.
If the child's going to do better at the kitchen sink, fine. If they're going to do better sitting at the kitchen table with a spittoon and a cup of water, great. It's fine. So, Sometimes kids do better if they're sitting, they have some postural support. Yeah, just something with a spit cup.
I didn't know what a
Oh,
spittoon was.
a
Okay.
spittoon. See, I'm
Got it.
aging myself. No, I'm not real. I'm not that old. I'm not from the 1890s West, but so there's that, right? There's also the flavor of the toothpaste. Flavor of the toothpaste. There are chocolate. There's
Oh, the
cha-cha
vanilla
chocolate.
chocolate ice cream ones that I found
There's
a lot of
watermelon.
kids like.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's all
Yeah.
these different flavors. So, if the child loves chocolate, it's good chocolate toothpaste. And yeah, your in-laws may think you're indulging your child, but tough luck. They don't need to brush,
Yeah, they don't live there.
get those teeth brushed.
Yeah.
There's different toothbrushes
Mm.
that can be used. And there's something that kids are maybe you've seen around. It's called a U brush. It's an ultrasonic brush. It goes in the mouth, you hang out for X number of seconds, and your teeth are brushed.
Yeah.
So there's all these
There's
different
so many things out there too. There's apps even
variables.
that you can have on a phone and it shows you as a Pokemon. And then you have
Oh my
to
God, I
brush
love
the
that.
Pokemon off their teeth and you get
Lindsey
points.
has an
So
app.
you hold it in front of them. Yeah. So there's so many things out
Love
there.
that.
Yeah.
If you have older kids, there's one called Toothy. It's
Mhm.
not, I mean, some of our older kids are still want to brush their teeth with Elsa, but I would brush my teeth with Elsa. She's great. So there's all different, yeah, there's so many different things that we can do. There's variables. So always think about the variables that can change. And most important is give the child a sense of choice and mastery,
Mhm.
right? You got to brush your teeth. That's kind of non-negotiable,
Right.
but you
Want to
can
brush
do,
it in the bathroom or the kitchen.
yeah, or this toothbrush or that one.
Mhm.
What are you in the mood for? Chocolate or watermelon today? It's like, oh, I get to choose. Okay. It's much more acceptable. And that's true for foods. It's true for a lot of things.
I'm just thinking about this now because we were talking about parents and going in and just shoving the toothbrush in. And I know sometimes parents will get upset and they get anxious too when they know their child's going to refuse something, right? But they want to do it. They want their kids to brush their teeth. So I think a big piece that I've been seeing more of lately too is talking about co-regulation.
Yes.
And co-regulation is whoever is with the child staying regulated. So if the parent is calm, then in turn the child will be calm because the parent's their safe person, right? So if you're showing anxiety, the parent starts getting nervous, the kids can feel it, and you go to stick that toothbrush in their mouth and you're nervous
They
about
feel
it, they feel that energy. And so
Same
I
thing.
think
Sorry,
co-regulation.
Carolyn.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Oh, no,
apologize. I
go
was
ahead.
just
Yeah.
saying the same thing with feeding because we
Yes.
do a lot with feeding, and you see it, and I could feel the anxiety from the
Right.
parent as they're presenting. the
Right. And
food.
so like you were
Yeah.
talking about making sure that they're feeling safe. I think that's a huge part of kids feeling safe is
Yeah.
their parent feeling regulated too before doing it. So I
100%.
know as a parent, because I'm a parent too, and you need to get out of the house, you need to get these teeth brushed, you need to get them to eat, you need to get them to do this. But if staying calm is such a big part of them staying safe.
It's true. And it's easier said than done, isn't
Oh
it?
yeah. Yes.
Some quick,
Training on the parents' part. It really
yeah,
does.
it's really hard. Quick tips for parents, if you can catch yourself, slow down your speech
Mhm.
and lower your voice,
Yes.
right? Because when we get upset, especially as women, our voices get
Right.
fast
Oh yeah.
and they just go up and up and up, and it just increases everyone's agitation, right?
And give yourself time. I know in the morning it's hard when you're trying to get your kid out of the house, but I think like if you know your kid's going to give you a hard time putting their shoes and socks on, give yourself a half hour, before you have to leave and start, giving them the choices. And I think sometimes too, as moms, right, we want to do everything so fast and we have to,
Get out, go,
get
go,
out.
go,
And
go.
so,
Yeah.
and I
Right.
find that when children feel rushed and they feel like it has to happen at this second, then we're not giving them time to process what's happening either. So throwing a sock on them really fast is scary, if you're putting it on slower and in a calm way,
Mhm.
it's not as scary for them.
It's
And
true.
those are all very simple strategies, right? That
Yeah.
I have another question, Lindsay. Can I ask you, you started to talk about neurodiversity, and a lot of the children that we see, and this has changed over the years, have that's the self-stimulatory behaviors. And I saw it yesterday. I was working with a student. We were playing a game, and she was so excited. And right, so those self-stimulatory behaviors, it's almost like her cup is running over and it's just coming out. So the old way that I found, and we were always taught, was to try and, kind of get them to stop doing it. But I kind of see it in the other way, is if that's what they need to do, we want to reinforce that, or
Right.
maybe give them another outlet. So I was just curious what you think about that.
Right. Self-stimulatory behaviors, you're right. I mean, a parent's first impulse is like, stop, don't do that, right? And you'll hear teachers saying, oh, quiet hands,
Mhm.
quiet hands, like hands don't speak. They can't be. What is that?
Yeah, what are quiet hands,
I
really?
love that. You're
Like,
right.
I don't know.
Not they're not making noise.
No.
Right. So when we think about these stims, they're coping mechanisms,
Mhm.
right? So they're they serve a couple of purposes. They help to calm a person down, right? If someone starts doing that, or spinning or walking back and forth, it may help them calm down. It may help them to burn off energy. It may just feel really good to the person. They actually did some tests. I don't know how they pulled it off, but they had people stimming in an fMRI machine and watched what happens with their brains. And all the pleasure centers lit up.
Hmm.
So it's like, okay, if you're going to take that away as if you could, you're taking away what might be a really pleasurable thing for a person and a method of self-expression for a person. No, the parent doesn't like to see those behaviors because it's the mark of something different. If a parent can help the person channel it into a behavior, a different behavior, if the person is hurting themselves, for example, or hurting others, or it's somehow unsafe, that would be a good thing. Biting hands, biting nails, that kind of thing. You do want to try to move that into something else. Having some crunchy carrot sticks if possible, having a chewy pendant would be ideal. Or even just, I'd like to give a terry cloth wristband to chew on that, because that feels more like you're chewing on yourself, right? So I think stims are not a horrible thing. And parents are going to find it really interesting. It's another thing that's changed since the time we all first started, is we can now all ask someone who's autistic, what is that? Why are you doing that? What do you get out of that? What happened when someone said you can't do that? So, go to some of the autism advocacy groups that are on like Facebook, and see what they have to say. And then you really get this perspective on the behaviors, the outward behaviors, and what they're all about. Because remember, those behaviors, the stims, that's the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that is all the stuff that it's actually about. Right? Does that make sense?
Does.
Yeah.
And to tell them to stop doing it is in some ways cruel, I think.
Yeah.
There's a
It's
cruelty
taking
to it.
away,
Yeah.
Yeah.
something, listening to music. Like if you like to listen to music while you're working, it would be like, oh, you can't do that because
Can't do that. Can't do that. And you know what? If you manage to take away a stim, another one's going to crop up.
More
So,
behavior.
yeah, another behavior, because
Yeah.
it's serving a purpose for the person. Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to thank you so
Yeah.
much. I feel like we could keep
I
talking
know.
for hours.
I could talk about this all day.
Yeah.
I love it.
Oh, yeah. Well, have me on again.
Oh,
Yeah,
We'll talk
absolutely.
more. We'll
we
talk more. But there's so much in my book. so much. And you do want to make sure that you have the current edition, which looks like this.
So again, Raising a Sensory Smart
Sensory Smart.
Child
Yeah.
by the brilliant Lindsey Biel.
And you
Oh,
have
and
really
Nancy
great
Pesky,
information
thank
on your
you.
website as well, which is
Yeah, yeah. If
sensorysmart.com.
parents want to go to the Sensory Smarts website and go on to the What is SPD page, there is a free checklist, sensory checklist that they can print out. Just, I wrote it so that parents can better tune into what's going on with their child.
Mhm.
You know, it's not a diagnostic tool. It's just like getting to know your kid better, connecting the dots between
Wow.
the behaviors that you're seeing and what is driving it.
I mean, we give this book out a lot, so I thank you for helping all of
Thank
our
you.
clients and students. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you for your time, Lindsay.
Yes.
Have an incredible summer.
Pleasure.
Talk
Okay.
soon. Have
Take
a good
care.
day.
Have fun. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.